Judge Fred Fox served the people of Marion County and of West Virginia for 40 years. He saw and did just about everything associated with the law. This is part 2 of our conversation, right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
We're talking about the 40-year judicial career of my guest, Judge Fred L. Fox II. Judge Fox, in our last conversation, we got you up through your first trial where your teachers were standing in front of you trying the case, and you said that was an easy trial. The next one became more complex. Do you have any idea how many trials that you have presided over as a judge?
I really don't. We used to try a lot more cases, as you know. We used to try a lot more cases than we try now. Criminal cases, the number of criminal cases has remained basically about the same, but with mediation, the number of civil cases has just dropped off the table. But it would be in the hundreds.
What does a judge do at a trial?
Referees, and basically tries to make sure that everything's done right.
You're protecting the interests of the people standing in front of you, I would suppose.
Exactly, and you're protecting the system.
The system?
The legal system, the whole justice system. You know, that's if you have inadequate judges, then your chances of getting justice are not going to be nearly as good as if you have good judges.
Well, you raised the word justice, and I've always been kind of fascinated by it. What is it?
It's a process. It's a means to an end. It's not always right. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I agree with every verdict that I've seen returned in my court. But I respect every verdict that I've seen returned in my court, because I think it's a little presumptuous of me to assume that 12 good and tried people made a mistake and what I'm thinking is right. And secondly, it's the system.
I've had people come to me and I'll say to them, what is it that you want? What is it that you're looking for? And invariably somebody will pound their fist on the table and say, I want justice. And then I pause the conversation at that point and I say, you can get that, but you may not like it. You may be the most deserving person in the world, but when you get justice, you may disagree with the result, because justice, as you say, is a process. It's not some golden trophy that arrives at the end of the trial. That's the verdict and the judgment. Justice is the machine that you go through, and sometimes it is like going through a machine.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Well, what do you do when you're not in the courtroom?
Actually, we used to have to keep time, and there's a story behind that, but I won't go into that. But judges used to have to keep time. And what I found was that in keeping time was that actually I spend about 40% of my time in the courtroom, less than half. And the rest of the time in my office, usually writing opinions, things of that nature. So it's, people assume judges go to work and go in the courtroom and stay there for 8 hours and go home. That's not it. 40% of my time is spent in the courtroom, and the other 60% spent in the office.
Of the 40% of the time you spend in the courtroom, how much of that is actually trying cases?
10. Maybe 10.
What's the rest of that time?
Hearings. You can almost bet for every case you try, whether it be a civil or a criminal case, you've probably had 6 or 8 hearings where you had the parties and the lawyers there, and you were trying to decide what was admissible, what was not admissible, whether summary judgment should be granted, and so forth.
Use a lot of technical terms there. Those are the mechanics of the case.
The mechanics of the case, exactly.
There can be disputes about what kind of information you have to provide, what kind of information I have to provide,
Right.
What all that means. And there are disputes about when are we going to do, what are we going to do.
Yeah. And the other thing is that most people don't realize is that in West Virginia, and I'm speaking of our system, in West Virginia, circuit judges spend more time with juvenile delinquency and abuse and neglect than any other segment of the law. In other words, probably 40% of my time is spent with abuse and neglect, and probably 20% with criminal, 30% with civil, and 10% with extraordinary remedies of one time or another.
The extraordinary remedies are?
Asking for injunctions, and motions, things of that nature.
Tell us about the juvenile and abuse and neglect matters. What do you see in those cases?
You see a lot of abuse and neglect. It's hard with abuse and neglect because judges tend to put their own values into what is an appropriate manner to discipline a child or to raise a child or something like that. You see kids that are starved. You see kids that are beaten. You see kids that are tortured with cigarette burns. That's not an everyday thing. But I tell you one thing: if you sit in a hearing in an abuse and neglect case which involves abuse of a child on a Friday afternoon, it ruins your weekend.
It's got to be the hardest part of law.
It is. It is. It's not the hardest part in the sense that, at least in abuse and neglect, you feel like you can protect children. You are protecting children. That's the purpose of the whole system, is to protect children. The hardest the hardest part of being a judge is a part that I no longer do, and that's domestic relations. In 1989, I had enough time in as a judge and 6 years of military time that I could have taken my full retirement. In 1988, the legislature passed what then was called the Family Law Master System, which took over domestic relations, divorces. Had that not happened, I would have retired the first day I could have retired in 1989. That's how much I disliked domestic relations and divorces.
Domestic relations involves what?
It involves two unreasonable people. It involves making decisions that maybe God should be making about who gets custody of the child and who doesn't get custody of the child, and things of that nature. And it's just really, I found it really hard. Some judges like it. Some family court judges like it because they do it. But with me, as I said, the only thing that kept me here for 40 years was the fact that in 1988, the legislature saw fit to create a family law master system, which is now a family court system. And we have the whole family court system, and the circuit judges play a very small role.
Are you still involved in abuse and neglect cases?
Yes.
Do you have the tools in abuse and neglect cases to do what needs to be done?
Yes, pretty much so. We don't have enough DHHR workers.
DHHR is Department of Health and Human Resources.
Department of Health and Human Resources. We don't have enough people out there. We have the resources. We have the legislation, which tells teachers and emergency room personnel and other people like that they have to report suspected abuse or neglect, and that the failure to do so is a crime in itself. So we have the legislation, but we need more people to go out and investigate once those allegations are made.
We're talking about the 40-year judicial career of my guest, Judge Fred L. Fox II. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. I received a survey a couple of weeks ago from the American Bar Association. The purpose of the survey was to seek out opinions of practicing lawyers about whether the court system had the sufficient resources and tools to do what need to be done. And as you read the questions, there was this undertone of there's not enough money to pay for what we need to have. And then they asked the ultimate question, they said, what do you think we should do about all of this? What would your answer be to that? And my answer, of course, was adequately fund the court system.
Exactly.
Of course, we listened to the President's State of the Union speech recently, and as if we needed to be reminded, we are reminded there's just not enough money to do what needs to be done.
That's exactly right.
But you would think that the first place you might want to put it is to see that the resources are there to protect children.
Yes, yes.
Juvenile cases. What do you think about that part of your work?
There is more of it now than there used to be.
So do you think?
Because we have more resources in that area now than we used to have. We used to be. I was a circuit court judge. I had one juvenile probation officer, and he handled all the juveniles in the whole county. We now have 3 juvenile probation officers, all kinds of other support personnel.
You're talking about Marion County,
right?
Where you are on the
where
bench.
I am, right? What we need with regard to delinquency, which is what you're talking about, juvenile delinquency, is more facilities to treat.
What kind of facilities treat delinquency?
Facilities that treat delinquents who have emotional or mental or other kind of problems, and you know, we don't send as many people out of state now as we used to, but we do send juveniles out of state to out-of-state facilities. We need more in-state facilities.
Are we talking about what would classically be referred to as reform schools, or?
No. Reform school is more like a prison, and we try to avoid it being like a prison anymore. Although Pruntytown in its day did exactly what it was supposed to do, and as long as you had Frank Gatsky there, then everything was going to be okay.
Well, what was it supposed to do?
It was supposed to basically take people out of the school system who couldn't comply with the school system, and take children who had no concept of obeying the law and put them somewhere where they had to obey the law.
That sounds like a prison.
Pruntytown was a juvenile prison, I guess. But you know, you talk to people, and I know some, and you probably know some, who were in Pruntytown, and they don't recognize it as having been in a prison.
Did they get help there?
Yeah, they got help there.
When you sit up on the bench and you look out, and typically there are two parties in a case, sometimes more, there may be 3 or 4, but typically 2 parties. One's complaining and the other one's explaining, whether it's civil or criminal. What do you think of the lawyers that you see there?
I think by and large lawyers do a good job. I think there are exceptions, and the biggest exception are not in terms of not doing a good job. It's just not doing a job, period. Most complaints about lawyers deal with lawyers not doing their job, and that applies to criminal and civil. Most complaints are that's what it boils down to, is that people complain because their lawyer won't properly represent them, won't return their telephone calls. But you know, if you're a divorce lawyer, for example, in the process of an 8-month divorce, you better figure on getting 150 phone calls at home at night from your client.
You're not suggesting that's what should happen, are you?
No, I'm saying that's what does happen in a lot of cases. Clients can be totally unreasonable, civil and criminal, but when it comes down to where lawyers get in trouble, where they're actually in trouble with the Supreme Court, it's because they don't tend to their business.
How often do you see that occurring?
Not very often. You know, for example, I read in the paper the other day where 3 lawyers had been disbarred, and all 3 of them were disbarred basically for failing to represent their clients.
We're talking about the 40-year judicial career of my guest, Judge Fred L. Fox II. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. Does the court system need changed, reformed in any particular way that you see now?
We can always improve. We probably need a few more judges, although that's not a popular thing with the population, and I don't see the legislature doing that. But there are some circuits that I think are overworked. For example, Monongalia County, until they got an extra judge, was too busy a circuit to have 2 judges.
And that area is one of the quickest growing, fastest growing areas in the state. And we do have to look at those areas to see if the justice system is keeping up. Procedurally, do you see any problems in the way the court system does things or changes that need to be made?
No. You know, I would love to have the creation of a brand new criminal code. You wouldn't believe the kind of laws that we still have on our books. For example, it's a felony to throw a rock at a train. Now, that came out of the strikes in southern West Virginia in the early 1900s, where the pickets would throw rocks at coal trains. It's a felony.
It's a felony to throw a rock at a train full of rocks.
Full of anything. Yes, yes. And we have a lot of laws. It's a felony to spit on the street. Or no, it's not a felony. It's a crime to spit on the street. I would like to see the criminal code updated. I think it would be a task which is almost too difficult to even conceive.
Maybe that's why nobody's trying. Well, it's not fair to say nobody's trying to do it, because there is a lot of discussion about that.
Right.
And the West Virginia Law Institute
But it is
looking
really, it's just an overwhelming task.
Are those laws enforced, though?
No.
You don't see much
No.
of those in the courtroom.
No, they're not.
But it
They're not.
needs to be smoothed out.
The West Virginia Code consists of 25 volumes now, and probably on a regular basis, I use 3 or 4 volumes.
These volumes we're talking about, it looks just about like a novel size book, and there are lots and lots of laws in there. You served for a while on the Supreme Court. How long were you down there?
I was down there for 11 months.
How did that come about?
Justice Brotherton had a heart attack and was unable to fulfill the position, and the court appointed me to come down and sit on the Supreme Court in his stead. And I was there for 11 months. I came home on Thursday evenings so that I could hold court in Marion County on Fridays, usually. And one weekend, this story made the Charleston Gazette. One weekend I came home on the weekend on Friday and held hearings in circuit court in Marion County. And that evening I got a call from one of the magistrates who was on call and who was sick and couldn't come out. And the other magistrates were at school. And so I said, okay, I'll take your on-call duty for you. So I got called out twice for drunk drivers and went out and did the magistrate's job. And so the Charleston Gazette, Ted Filyaw told the Charleston Gazette, and they wrote a story that in a period of 3 days, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I sat as a Supreme Court justice, a circuit court judge, and a magistrate.
Which was the most difficult?
Magistrate.
Why?
Because there's all kinds of forms, and I wasn't familiar with them.
It was the paperwork?
The paperwork was terrible.
Magistrate court, though, has always kind of fascinated me. I have often referred to it as the court of common sense, because the magistrate sits up there and just tries to put out those fires that turn into things that end up in the circuit court or sometimes even the Supreme Court. And sometimes those matters are best handled not by pulling out a copy of the law and saying, this is how you're supposed to do it, and this is what you're supposed to, but by looking at the person and just laying the law on them, telling them how they're supposed to behave and that they're not doing it right.
Yeah. Good magistrates do that and take care of a lot of their business that way. Some magistrates go overboard with it. But, magistrates can do what circuit judges can't do, which is say, okay, guys, now let's talk about this. Let's work this out. Mediators can do that. Magistrates can do it. Circuit judges, probably not.
Now, by the time you get into the circuit court, if you want to sit down and talk about it, you have to file a motion and schedule a hearing and write briefs.
Exactly.
Is law too expensive?
Yes. Well, do lawyers make too much? No. The average lawyer, I don't think, is overpaid.
No, it's really not a profession to get rich in anymore. Maybe at one time it was.
It is not. It really is not. And I think, for example, lawyers that take appointed criminal cases are working for pauper's wages, and a lot of young lawyers, that's how they make their living. So I don't think I don't think it's overpaid.
When you and I started eons ago, taking court-appointed cases and working for very low wages was how you got experience, how you learned to be a lawyer. But now it seems like many more are trying to live on those wages and make a career out of that.
And they are. A lot of them are. And especially here in Monongalia County and in Marion County next door, because you got so many young law graduates whose wives or husbands are in med school or some other school, and they're here trying to make a living while the other half of the marriage gets through wherever it is, so they can go, if it's a doctor, get rich somewhere.
Would you do it all over again?
I would do. I have only one real serious regret in my life, and that is that my father died. My father died when I was between my sophomore and junior year in college, and up to that point, I had strived to be mediocre. And I think my one regret is my father didn't see me get to graduate from law school, didn't see me practice law, didn't see me be a judge, and didn't see my son, his grandson, become a lawyer.
Judge Fred Fox, thank you, sir, for being with us.
Okay.
Thank you also for being with us. On behalf of the Law Works, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening. If you have a legal problem and want to know if you need a lawyer, you can discuss your problem with a lawyer by calling 1-800-642-3617 Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. That's 1-800-642-3617. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks program topics and additional information about this show's topic. If you would like to recommend this program to a friend, you'll find a video of the program at the LawWorks website. You'll also find free video and podcasts of previous programs on YouTube and iTunes. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future program, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a free copy of this show for classroom use, send us an email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The Law Works is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.